When my 9-year-old son held up a note that said, "Pack your things, you're not staying here," I thought it was just family drama, until I discovered the house wasn't even theirs to give away. My own parents tried to kick him out of a home legally placed in an irrevocable trust under his name, and 5 days later, we were standing in a courtroom where a judge read their words out loud and ordered them to leave. What they didn't expect was that I already knew about the trust, and that I was done choosing peace over protection. Chapter 1. The Note on the Kitchen Table. It was 7:08 in the morning when my phone started vibrating against the glass desk in my hotel room in Chicago. I remembered the exact time because I had just glanced at the clock, calculating how long I could stay in bed before heading down to the compliance conference at the Hyatt. Boston was an hour ahead, which meant it was just after 8 at home in Brookline. Too early for a casual call. Too early for anything good. When I saw Noah's name on the screen, something inside me tightened. My son is 9 years old. He is not a morning person. On school days, I usually have to call him twice just to get him moving. He does not FaceTime at 8:08 a.m. unless something is wrong. I answered immediately. The camera shook before it steadied. I saw his forehead first, then his eyes, wide and glossy. He didn't say hello. Instead, he turned the phone downward. The image settled on our kitchen table. There was a half-finished glass of milk, a cereal bowl with a spoon resting inside it, and in the middle of the table, laid flat like a bill or a receipt, was a piece of lined paper torn from a notebook. His small hand pushed it closer to the camera. "Pack your things. Leela needs your room. You're not staying here." My chest felt like it had dropped through the floor. For a second, I thought I had misread it, that maybe there was a second page, a clarification, a joke, something. There wasn't. Noah's voice came through thin and unsteady. "Mom, do I not live here anymore?" The words did something physical to me. I sat up so fast, the sheets tangled around my legs. "No," I said it instantly. "No, of course you live there. Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" "In the living room," he whispered. "They said it's just for a while. They said Aunt Cecilia needs my room. They said I can go to Dad's if I don't like it." His voice didn't crack. That almost made it worse. It was the careful way he said it, like he was trying to understand something that didn't make sense. "Stay right there," I said. "Don't pack anything else. I'm calling Grandma right now." I hung up before he could hear the edge in my breathing. Margaret answered on the third ring. "Good morning," she said, like we were discussing groceries. "Did you leave a note for Noah telling him to pack his things and that he's not staying there?" There was a pause. Not confusion, not surprise, a pause to choose the right tone. "We're just rearranging temporarily," she said. "Cecilia had a situation with Mark. She needs space. Leela needs a proper bedroom." "You told my 9-year-old he's not staying there?" "Don't dramatize it, Serafina. He'll be fine. He can stay with Daniel for a bit. It's not permanent." Daniel, my ex-husband, has seen Noah twice in the past 6 months. He lives 40 minutes away and forgets school pickup times. They know that. They know exactly how unsettled that would make him. Thomas got on the line then. "We didn't kick him out," he said. "We're just making room for family." "He is family." "So is Cecilia," Thomas replied, sharper now. "And Leela is only 8. She can't sleep on a couch." I could feel something shifting inside me, something quiet and solid. "I'm coming home," I said. "That's not necessary," Margaret began, but I had already ended the call. I called the conference coordinator, said there was a family emergency, and packed in under 10 minutes. The drive from Chicago to O'Hare felt like it took hours. Every red light felt personal. On the flight back to Boston, I replayed the image of that note over and over. The casual cruelty of it, the placement on the kitchen table, next to his breakfast. I kept hearing Noah's voice. "Do I not live here anymore?" When I pulled into my parents' driveway in Brookline just before noon, Cecilia's SUV was already there. Of course it was. I walked in without knocking. The house smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. Normal, calm, as if nothing had happened. Thomas was standing near the hallway, arms crossed. "We told you it was temporary," he said immediately. "Where's Noah?" "In his room," Margaret answered from the kitchen. I walked past both of them. Cecilia was sitting on the couch scrolling on her phone. She looked up, then quickly looked down again. "Hey," she muttered. I didn't respond. Noah's bedroom door was half closed. When I pushed it open, I saw a small navy blue suitcase sitting on his bed. One of the zippers was open, a few t-shirts were folded inside. He looked up at me and tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Are we moving?" he asked. I knelt in front of him. "No, sweetheart, we're leaving right now, but we're not moving. You live here." He hesitated. "Do I belong here?" That was the moment. Not the note, not the argument, not the phone call. That question. I wrapped my arms around him and felt how small his shoulders still were, how warm his head felt against my collarbone. "You belong wherever I am," I said quietly, "and I'm not letting anyone make you feel like you don't." We packed only what he needed for a few days. Clothes, his tablet, his favorite blue hoodie, his stuffed sea turtle that he pretends he's too old for, but still sleeps with when he's anxious. When we stepped back into the hallway, Margaret was waiting. "This is unnecessary," she said. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "You left him a note," I said. "You didn't even talk to him." "We didn't want to upset him," she replied. I actually laughed, but it came out hollow. Thomas stepped forward. "Cecilia and Leela need stability. You're an adult. He'll adjust." Cecilia finally looked up from the couch. "It's not a big deal, Rena. It's just for a few weeks." Her voice wavered slightly when she said my nickname. She avoided my eyes. I studied her face. There was something there. Not guilt exactly, something closer to fear. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Thomas frowned. "What's that?" "It's a formal request from my attorney, Avery Collins. You'll need to provide full documentation for the Eleanor Whitman Trust, all accounting records from 2014 to present." Margaret's expression changed instantly. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Thomas took the envelope and pulled out the first page. His face went pale in a way I had never seen before. Margaret grabbed the papers from him. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. Cecilia stood up. "How did you even find that?" The room went silent. I didn't answer her. I simply took Noah's hand. "We're leaving," I said. Margaret's voice rose. "You can't just storm out like this. We're trying to make things fair." "Fair?" I repeated softly. Thomas muttered something under his breath. Cecilia didn't move. She just stared at the documents in Margaret's hands. I walked toward the door with Noah beside me. As I stepped out into the driveway, the spring air felt sharper than it had that morning. Noah squeezed my fingers tighter. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. "No," I said. "We're not in trouble." Behind us, I heard the front door open and Margaret call my name. I didn't turn around, because 2 weeks earlier, in a dusty box in the attic, I had found something they thought I would never see. And now, everything was about to change. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2, The Attic File. 2 weeks before the note showed up on the kitchen table, I had been standing in my parents' attic with a dust mask pulled halfway down my face, wondering why I had agreed to spend my Saturday sorting through boxes that were not mine. My mother had asked me to help clear out old paperwork. She said she wanted to declutter. She said it was time to get organized. It sounded harmless, almost responsible. I had driven over with coffee and work gloves, thinking I would be there for a couple of hours. The attic smelled like insulation and old cardboard. There were plastic bins labeled Christmas, tax returns, Cecilia's school, and one stack of banker's boxes without labels at all. I started with the unlabeled ones. Inside the third box, beneath yellowed envelopes and old insurance policies, I found a thick manila folder with a title printed neatly across the top. Irrevocable Trust, Eleanor Whitman Trust, executed June 2014. My grandmother Eleanor had passed away in February of 2015. I had been pregnant with Noah then. I remembered the funeral. I remembered her hand in mine the last time I saw her. What I did not remember was any conversation about a trust. I sat down on the attic floor and opened the folder. The document was formal and precise. I read the first page once, then again more slowly. Trustees listed were Margaret Vale and Thomas Vale. Sole beneficiary listed was Noah Vale, my son. I flipped through the pages, pulse picking up. The trust language was clear. Upon Eleanor Whitman's passing, the property and certain financial holdings were placed into the trust for the benefit of Noah Vale, with Margaret and Thomas serving as trustees until he reached adulthood. No one had ever told me. I took photos of every page with my phone. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I felt more analytical than emotional at that moment, the way I do when reviewing compliance documentation at work. Downstairs, I could hear my mother moving around in the kitchen. I closed the folder, slipped it back into the box, and carried the entire box down with me. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "what is the Eleanor Whitman Trust?" She froze for half a second before turning around. "What are you talking about?" "I found paperwork in the attic. It lists you and Dad as trustees. It lists Noah as the sole beneficiary." She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, that. You're misunderstanding it. It's just estate planning language. The house is ours." "That is not what it says." She turned back to the sink. "You don't need to dig into everything, Serafina. It was complicated back then." "Complicated how?" Thomas walked in from the garage at that moment, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's going on?" I held up my phone with the photo of the first page. "Can you explain this to me?" He glanced at the screen, then at me. "That house is ours," he said flatly. "It is in an irrevocable trust." "We refinanced in 2016, he shot back. "You don't refinance something you don't own." I felt something shift there. Not confusion, not misunderstanding, deflection. "You refinanced it," I repeated slowly. "With whose authority?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "You don't need to get legal about this." That phrase stayed with me. "You don't need to get legal about this." That afternoon, after I left their house, I sat in my car and called a number I had pulled from an online search for trust litigation attorneys in Boston. Avery Collins answered her own phone. I introduced myself and summarized what I had found. She asked me to email the photos. Within an hour, she called me back. "The trust appears valid and properly executed," she said. "If the property is indeed titled under the trust, then your parents are acting as fiduciaries. That means they have a legal obligation to act in the best interest of the beneficiary, which is my son." "Yes." "If they tried to remove him from the property without cause, or if they were using trust assets improperly, that could constitute a breach." The word breach made everything feel real. I asked her about the refinance in 2016. "It depends on how the property was titled at the time," she said. "We would need full accounting records. Trustees are required to maintain detailed financial documentation." Full accounting. As soon as she said it, pieces began sliding into place. In 2016, my father had told me business was slow at the hardware store. A few months later, they refinanced the house. I had not thought much of it at the time. In 2021, when Noah and I moved back after my divorce from Daniel, my parents told me they needed help covering equity costs, $1,200 a month. I paid it without arguing. Over 3 years, that was more than $40,000. Equity intribution, they called it. But if the house was in trust, if they were trustees and not owners, what exactly was I contributing to? Then older memories surfaced. In 2012, I had graduated from college with $32,000 in student loans because my parents said they could not afford to help me. In 2013, they paid Cecilia's final year of tuition outright. At the time, I told myself circumstances had changed, that maybe they were in a better position. Sitting in my car outside their house, phone pressed to my ear, I felt a different truth settling in. Favoritism had never been subtle in my family. It had just been quiet. I asked Avery what the next step would be. We send a formal request for accounting and documentation. If there are irregularities, we can petition the court for oversight.
If there is an immediate threat to the beneficiary's housing stability, we can request emergency relief. Housing stability. 2 weeks later, when my son showed me a note telling him he was not staying there, that phrase echoed in my mind. I did not confront them immediately after finding the trust. I wanted documentation first. I wanted facts. Avery drafted a demand letter requesting full accounting from 2014 to present. She also confirmed through county records that the property title was indeed held under the trust. They had never told me because they did not want to. The morning Noah called from the kitchen table, I forwarded Avery a photo of the note. Within hours, she drafted an emergency petition to Suffolk County Family Court citing minor housing instability and potential breach of fiduciary duty. The hearing was scheduled 5 days later. That night, after I walked out of my parents' house with Noah's small hand wrapped around mine, we drove straight to Erica Moreno's place in Jamaica Plain. Erica is a nurse and my closest friend since high school. She didn't ask questions, she just opened the door and pulled Noah into a hug. We set him up on Erica's living room sofa with a blanket and his stuffed sea turtle. He fell asleep faster than I expected, exhaustion catching up with him. I sat in the dim light of Erica's apartment watching his chest rise and fall. His hair was messy from the day. One of his sneakers was still half untied. I thought about the attic, about the folder, about my mother's dismissal and my father's deflection. I thought about the note on the kitchen table. This was not about rearranging bedrooms. This was about control, about access, about who got to decide where my child belonged. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment. No contact is not punishment, I told myself quietly. It is protection. And in 5 days, we were going to walk into a courtroom and make that protection official.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3. In the courtroom. The courtroom in Suffolk County Family Court was smaller than I expected. Not dramatic, not grand, just a quiet room with polished wood benches, a Massachusetts state seal behind the bench, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everything feel exposed. Noah sat beside me, his legs not quite reaching the floor. His sneakers swung slightly every time he shifted. I kept my hand over his. Across the aisle, Margaret sat stiffly, lips pressed thin. Thomas leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Cecilia sat at the far end, eyes fixed on the floor. Avery Collins stood beside me, calm and precise as always. Judge Jonathan Reed entered without fanfare. Everyone rose. My heart was steady in a way that surprised me, not because I wasn't afraid, but because something inside of me had already decided this was the right fight. The clerk called the case. Avery presented first. She laid out the structure of the Eleanor Whitman Trust, its execution in 2014, Eleanor's passing in 2015, and the designation of Noah Vale as sole beneficiary. She emphasized the recent attempts to remove a minor beneficiary from the trust property without prior notice or legal basis. Margaret's attorney countered quickly. They were simply rearranging space within the home, he said. No one was evicted, there was no malicious intent. Judge Reed looked down at the documents in front of him. Rearranging space, he repeated slowly. Thomas leaned toward his attorney, whispering something. Then he stood up before being prompted. Your Honor, he said, my daughter knew about the trust. She's acting like this is some secret we kept. She understood the situation. Avery stood immediately. Your Honor, my client discovered the existence of the irrevocable trust 2 weeks ago. She was not informed of its terms previously. Thomas shook his head. That house is ours. We refinanced in 2016. We've paid the taxes for years. Judge Reed held up a hand. I'm not interested in family narratives. I am interested in legal ownership and fiduciary duty. Avery handed the note to the clerk. It was passed to the judge. He adjusted his glasses and read it silently at first. Then he read it again, this time more slowly. Pack your things. Leela needs your room. You're not staying here.
The words sounded heavier in that room than they had in my hotel. Judge Reed looked over at Margaret. "Did you write this?" Margaret cleared her throat. "It was just a temporary adjustment. We didn't want to upset him with a long explanation." Judge Reed's expression did not change. "You informed a 9-year-old child that he was not staying in the property of which he is the sole beneficiary, without notice to his legal guardian." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "It was family, Your Honor. We didn't think it required a court filing." Avery spoke again. "Your Honor, trustees have a fiduciary obligation to act in the best interest of the beneficiary. Removing a minor beneficiary from trust property without process raises serious concerns." Judge Reed turned his attention to Noah. He softened slightly. "Young man, can you tell me how you felt when you saw that note?" Noah looked at me first. I nodded gently. He swallowed. "I just didn't want to be where I'm not wanted." The room went quiet. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just quiet in a way that made every breath audible. Judge Reed leaned back in his chair. "Do you feel safe there right now?" Noah hesitated. "I don't know," he said softly. That was enough. Judge Reed looked down at his notes, then back up at both parties. "This is not a final ruling on the trust. However, the court has an obligation to ensure housing stability for a minor beneficiary. Effective immediately, I am issuing a temporary stabilization order for 30 days. Trustees Margaret Vale and Thomas Vale are to vacate the property within 14 days pending further review. Full accounting records from 2014 to present are to be submitted to this court." Margaret inhaled sharply. "You can't remove us from our own home," she said before her attorney could stop her. Judge Reed's voice remained steady. "The property is held in an irrevocable trust. You are trustees, not owners." The distinction hung in the air. Thomas sank back into his seat. The gavel did not slam. There was no dramatic sound, just the clerk announcing the next procedural step. Temporary. 30 days, 14 days to vacate. It was not a victory lap. It was a legal reset. Outside the courtroom, Margaret refused to look at me. Thomas muttered under his breath about lawyers and overreactions. Cecilia lingered near the exit. Avery stepped aside to take a call from her office. I stood still for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. We had not won everything, but Noah had not been told to pack a bag and disappear. As we moved toward the hallway, Avery returned. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Preliminary review of the accounting records they submitted this morning shows an expense in 2022. Garage structural repair, $9,750. I blinked. "For the Brookline property?" "No, the address attached matches a property in Newton, registered to Cecilia Hart." The hallway seemed to narrow. Cecilia was standing near the water fountain, scrolling through her phone again like none of this touched her. I walked toward her before I could overthink it. $9,750, garage structural repair in 2022, Newton address, yours. She froze. "What are you talking about?" "You tell me." Her eyes darted toward our parents, then back to me. "I didn't know it came from the trust," she said quickly. "Mom said they were helping. I thought it was their money." I studied her face. She looked nervous, but not shocked. "You asked about the trust in 2020. I saw the email." She swallowed. "It was just a question. I didn't know the details." "You knew enough to ask." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't write that note," she said finally. "I know," I replied. "You just benefited from it." Her shoulders slumped slightly. Behind us, Margaret called Cecilia's name sharply. Thomas was already heading toward the exit, jaw tight. Noah tugged on my hand. "Can we go now?" I asked. I nodded. As we walked down the courthouse steps into the cool Boston air, I realized something that unsettled me more than the note ever had. This was not just about favoritism. It was not just about who got the bigger bedroom or who was chosen first. This was about money that did not belong to them. This was about control dressed up as fairness. And if the preliminary audit was already showing irregularities, then the attic file had only been the beginning.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4: The Whisper Network. The order gave them 14 days to leave, but the damage spread in less than 48 hours. Margaret and Thomas moved into a short-term rental in Newton by the end of the week. I heard about it from Cecilia, not from them. She sent a brief text that simply said, "They are settled." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened in that courtroom. 3 days later, Cecilia posted a status on Facebook. Some children grow up and turn against the very people who raised them. Sad to see loyalty disappear when money gets involved. She did not tag me. She did not need to. Within hours, the Whisper Network was in motion. Brookline is not a small town, but it behaves like one. PTA meetings, church potlucks, youth soccer sidelines. Information moves sideways before it ever moves forward. The first crack showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. Noah came home from school quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack by the door and went straight to the couch without turning on the TV. "What happened?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "Nothing." I sat beside him and waited. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "A kid's mom said you kicked Grandma and Grandpa out. She said they had nowhere to go." The words hit harder than I expected. "Did she say that in front of you?" He nodded. "She said it while picking up her son. She didn't know I was standing there." I swallowed. "What did you say?" He shook his head. "Nothing." He looked up at me then. "Did you?" The question was simple, direct, 9-year-old logic. I took a breath. "Noah, a judge ordered them to leave temporarily because of the trust. It wasn't about kicking them out. It was about making sure you had stability." He listened carefully, absorbing every word. "But why would she say that?" he asked. "Because people don't always know the full story," I said, "and sometimes they repeat things that make them feel better about a situation." That night, I drafted an email to Karen Doyle, the principal at Brookline Elementary. I explained the court's temporary stabilization order. I requested that Margaret and Thomas be removed from Noah's approved pickup and emergency contact lists immediately. I attached documentation. Karen replied within hours. "We will update records first thing in the morning. Please let me know if Noah experiences any further issues." Professional, direct, no judgment. The next ripple came from a different direction. Linda Cho from Human Resources emailed me on Thursday afternoon. "Can you stop by my office tomorrow at 10? It was written politely, but I knew that tone. At 10 the next morning, I sat across from Linda in a glass-walled conference room at the insurance company where I worked. She folded her hands on the table. "We received an anonymous email referencing a family litigation matter involving you," she said. "It suggests potential reputational risk." Reputational risk. That phrase was part of my daily vocabulary. I handled regulatory compliance. I wrote policies about reputational risk. Now I was sitting on the other side of it. "The matter is personal," I said evenly. "It does not involve the company in any capacity." Linda nodded. "I understand. I just need to document that we discussed it. There are leadership promotions under review for early next year. We want to ensure no surprises." No surprises. I drove back to my desk with my jaw tight. This was how it worked. Not explosive, not loud, just a slow erosion of perception. That Sunday, Pastor Glenn Whitaker called. He had known my family for years. "I think it would be healthy if we all sat down and talked," he said gently. "Families shouldn't go through courts unless there's no other choice." There was no accusation in his voice, just a belief that reconciliation was always the right answer. "With respect, Pastor Glenn," I said, "this isn't about hurt feelings, it's about legal responsibility." Silence on the other end. "I hope you're not closing the door completely," he said. I did not answer that question directly. "I'm protecting my child," I said instead. He sighed softly. "I'll pray for clarity." Clarity was not what I needed. By Monday, 2 different cousins had messaged me. "I heard you're fighting over the house.
I didn't know you cared that much about money. Money. That word again. That evening, Noah refused to lay out his clothes for school the next day. I don't want to go, he said quietly. Is someone bothering you? No, he hesitated. I just don't want people talking about you. That was the moment I understood something. This wasn't about my reputation. It was about his peace. I went upstairs and opened my phone. Cecilia's post had dozens of comments now. Family first. Parents deserve respect. So sad when children forget who sacrificed for them. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could argue, I could write paragraphs explaining fiduciary duty and irrevocable trusts, I could attach legal citations, or I could do something simpler. I walked to the kitchen, opened the folder Avery had returned to me, and took out the original note. Pack your things, Leela needs your room, you're not staying here. I placed it on the counter, took a clear photo in good light, and posted it. No caption, no commentary, just the image. Within 20 minutes, the tone shifted. Are you serious? That was sent to a 9-year-old? That changes everything. My phone buzzed steadily for an hour. One cousin messaged privately, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Even Pastor Glenn texted. I see now there was more to it. The next morning, Cecilia's post was gone. Margaret called 3 times. I did not answer. Thomas left a voicemail. You had no right to put that out there. I deleted it without responding. For the first time since the hearing, I felt the narrative tilt. Not because I wanted public sympathy, but because truth, when left alone, can defend itself. 3 days later, on a gray Thursday evening, there was a knock at my door. Noah was at the kitchen table doing homework. Erica had gone home hours earlier. The house was quiet. I opened the door and saw Margaret and Thomas standing side by side on the porch. Margaret looked smaller than I remembered. Thomas looked tired. We need to talk, Margaret said. Not through lawyers, not through Facebook. Face to face, Thomas added quietly. This has gone too far. Behind them, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, Noah's pencil scratched against paper. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, weighing what had already happened against what was still unfolding. Then I stepped aside just enough to let them in and closed the door behind us.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. Fair was never the goal. The house felt smaller with all of us standing in the same room again. Margaret stayed near the doorway as if unsure whether she belonged inside. Thomas removed his jacket and folded it over his arm, a habit he had whenever he was nervous. Noah looked up from the kitchen table. Grandma, he said quietly. Margaret's face softened instantly. Hi, sweetheart. I stepped between them before the moment could shift into something sentimental. Go finish your homework upstairs, I told Noah gently. I'll come get you in a bit. He hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the stairs, glancing back once. When I heard his bedroom door close, the silence settled heavily. Margaret was the first to speak. This has gone too far, she said. Posting that note online, dragging the family into it? I met her eyes. You left that note on the kitchen table. It was temporary, she insisted. We have 2 grandchildren. It wasn't fair to always prioritize one over the other. Fair. There it was again. Thomas stepped forward. You know the situation in 2016, he said. The hardware store was failing. We refinanced because we had to. If we lost the house, everyone would have been out. Everyone. I folded my arms. The house was placed into an irrevocable trust in 2014, I said. You were trustees, not owners. Thomas ran a hand over his face. It's not that simple. It actually is. Margaret's voice sharpened. Cecilia had a child too. We were trying to make things equal. Equal would have been talking to me before telling my 9-year-old to pack his things. Margaret looked away. He would have adjusted. That sentence did something irreversible inside me.
2 weeks before the note, I found the trust documents in the attic, I said calmly. I didn't confront you publicly. I didn't call the court immediately. I gave you the benefit of privacy because you're my parents. Thomas frowned. Then why involve lawyers at all? Because the moment you hurt my child, you lost access to me. The words landed between us, clean and final. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she did not apologize. You're overreacting, she whispered. Am I? I walked to the dining table and pulled a folder from my bag. Avery sent the finalized accounting summary this afternoon. Thomas stiffened. We already gave her the records. You gave partial records. I slid the printed pages across the table. From 2019 to 2023, $18,400 in trust funds were used for expenses unrelated to the Brookline property. Thomas looked down at the numbers. His jaw tightened. Garage structural repair in 2022, I continued. $9,750. Newton address, Cecilia's house. Margaret's lips pressed together. We were helping her, she said, with funds designated for Noah. Cecilia's name hung in the room like a weight. Margaret lifted her chin. Cecilia didn't know it. I held her gaze. In 2020, she emailed you asking about the trust details. I saw the correspondence. She asked what it covered and how long it would remain in place. Thomas shifted. That doesn't mean she understood everything. It means she knew it existed. Margaret's voice dropped. We were trying to protect the family. By lying? By withholding information? By charging me $1,200 a month in equity contributions for a property held in trust. Thomas flinched at that. We had expenses, he said. Taxes, insurance. Then show the accounting clearly, transparent, not mixed with personal transfers. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, a car drove past slowly. The faint hum of tires on pavement filled the silence. Margaret's shoulders sagged. We never meant to hurt Noah, but you did, and that's the line. Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. What do you want? He asked. Not angrily, just tired. The question surprised me. What do I want? I did not want revenge. I did not want them homeless. I did not want humiliation. I wanted stability. I want the trust handled properly, I said. I want full financial oversight. I want you to relinquish your right to reside at the property. And I want reimbursement of the misused funds over a defined period. Margaret's eyes widened. You're asking us to give up the house? You are trustees, I said again, not owners. Thomas stared at the paperwork for a long time. If we agree to that, he said slowly, does this end? Does it end? I thought about the note, about Noah's voice in the courtroom, about the whispers at school. It ends legally, I said. It doesn't erase what happened. Margaret covered her mouth with her hand. We raised you, she said softly, and I'm grateful for that, but gratitude does not override responsibility. The following week, Avery drafted a settlement proposal. Trustees Margaret Vale and Thomas Vale would formally relinquish any claim to residency at the Brookline property. They would provide full financial disclosure under court supervision. The $18,400 in misallocated funds would be repaid into the trust over 18 months. An independent fiduciary monitor would oversee compliance. We met again at Avery's office in downtown Boston. Cecilia was there this time. She avoided my eyes as we sat at the long conference table. I didn't know it was coming from the trust, she said quietly, almost to herself. You knew enough to ask about it in 2020, I replied. She nodded faintly. I was just trying to understand what Grandma set up. Understanding and benefiting are two different things. She did not argue. Margaret's attorney went through the terms line by line. Thomas asked a few technical questions about repayment structure. Margaret remained silent. When the final document was printed, the room felt unnaturally still. Thomas signed first. His hand shook slightly. Margaret hesitated longer. She looked at me once as if searching for some version of me that might soften. I did not. She signed. Cecilia did not have to sign. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the table. When it was my turn, I picked up the pen. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I was not celebrating. I was not triumphant. I was closing a door. I signed my name slowly and pushed the document forward. Avery gathered the pages and nodded. "We will file this with the court tomorrow." Margaret stood without speaking. Thomas extended his hand toward me, then lowered it when I did not take it. "We'll make the payments," he said quietly. "I believe you will," I answered. They left together. Cecilia lingered for a second. "I never wanted it to get this far," she murmured. "Neither did I." When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the late afternoon sun reflected off the glass buildings around us. My phone buzzed with a text from Erica asking how it went. I typed 3 words. "It's legally done." But as I stood there watching traffic move through downtown Boston, I understood something clearly. This was never about fairness. It was about control. And control had finally shifted.
Chapter 6. Peace is quieter. It did not happen overnight. Peace did not arrive the day the settlement was signed. It did not walk in with a congratulatory handshake or a dramatic shift in tone. It arrived slowly, almost quietly, the way sunlight moves across a room when no one is looking. By the spring of 2025, Noah had turned 10. He stood in the living room one Saturday morning, holding a stack of brightly colored invitations in his hand. "Can I invite everyone?" he asked. "Everyone who?" I said, smiling. "Everyone from class, and maybe from soccer too." A year earlier, he had hesitated to tell classmates where he lived. Now he was arguing about how many balloons we could fit in the backyard. "You can invite whoever you want," I said. "It's your house." He didn't flinch at the word anymore. "It's your house." The party was loud and chaotic in the best way. 10-year-old boys running through the hallway, sneakers thudding against hardwood floors, the smell of pizza and frosting drifting through rooms that had once felt tense. I stood in the kitchen watching him explain the rules of a backyard game to his friends. "This is my room," he said proudly to one of them as they ran past me. No hesitation, no doubt. Margaret and Thomas were not there. They were living in a 2-bedroom condo in Quincy by then. Smaller, functional, quiet. They had sold the Newton rental early to cover the first lump sum repayment into the trust and committed to the remaining schedule over 18 months. They were not bankrupt, they were not ruined, but they were no longer pillars at the center of every family gathering. The church potlucks had grown quieter for them. Invitations had become less frequent. The whisper network that once worked in their favor had shifted its direction. Karma, when it came, did not scream. It adjusted reputations. Cecilia sent Noah a birthday card in the mail. "Happy 10, buddy. Hope your day is awesome." No personal note to me, no attempt at reconciliation, just distance. We saw each other occasionally at extended family events, but conversations were polite and brief. She had never directly admitted what she knew about the trust. I had stopped waiting for that admission. At work, the ripple had settled too. Linda Cho called me into her office again in February 2025. "I want to let you know that your promotion to Senior Compliance Manager has been approved," she said. "Congratulations." I thanked her and walked back to my office with a steady breath. The anonymous email had not derailed my career. If anything, handling a personal legal crisis with composure had reinforced what I had built professionally. Noah's school year moved forward without incident. The whispers faded. Children move on quickly. Adults take longer. There were moments, though, when the quiet felt almost surreal. One afternoon, Noah came home and dropped his backpack on the floor. "Can Grandma come to my soccer game next week?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. He shrugged. "I don't know. I just wondered."
I crouched in front of him. "You don't owe anyone access to you," I said, "not even family. If you want them there because you want them there, that's different." He thought about it. "Maybe not yet," he decided. That was enough. No contact had become less dramatic over time. It was no longer an act of defiance. It was a boundary. Margaret had called twice over the past year. I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were not angry anymore. They were careful. "We hope you're all well. Let us know if Noah needs anything." I never responded. Not out of spite, out of stability. Sometimes at night, after Noah had gone to bed, I would sit in the living room and look around at the house. The same walls, the same staircase, the same kitchen table where that note had once been placed. But it felt different. It felt like ours. There were no more equity contributions, no more subtle reminders that I was living under someone else's authority. The trust was monitored professionally. The accounting was transparent. Every statement was documented. Control had not disappeared. It had simply been redirected to where it legally belonged. One evening in late summer, as the sun poured through the front windows in long golden stripes, Noah ran through the living room chasing the dog we had adopted that spring. "Careful," I called out, laughing as he nearly knocked over a lamp. He stopped in the middle of the room and looked at me. "Mom." "Yeah? Are we staying here forever?" I smiled. "As long as we want to." He nodded once, satisfied, and sprinted down the hallway again. There was no trace of that small voice asking if he belonged. That question had been replaced with certainty. I have replayed everything in my head more times than I can count. The note, the courtroom, the whispers, the signatures on the settlement. People have asked indirectly, sometimes carefully, sometimes bluntly, whether I regret how far it went, whether I could have handled it more quietly, whether I could have just let it go. But every time I think back to that morning in Chicago, to my 9-year-old son holding up a piece of paper that told him he was not staying in his own home, the answer is simple. Peace is quieter than revenge. It does not demand applause. It does not trend on social media. It comes with a 10-year-old boy running across his living room without wondering if he belongs there. It comes with a career that did not collapse under rumor. It comes with a boundary that does not need to be explained twice. I did not destroy my parents. I did not humiliate them beyond what their own actions exposed. I protected my child. And in doing that, I protected myself. So I will leave you with the question that has followed me since that day. Was I too harsh, or did I finally do what a mother is supposed to do?